Well, hello. My name is Jim Hemak, and I'm a member of the JASAN organization. I've been given the privilege of doing the interview with the longest living JA legend in terms of years of service in the organization's history, and obviously a hugely significant figure in critical figure in the history of junior achievement, Jack Kosakowski. How are you doing, Jack?
Doing great. You know, Jim, in all my years in jail, I've been called a lot of things, but never a legend. So thank you.
Well, that's what happens when you retire. You
I
become a
see.
legend. There you
Yeah.
go. Well, Jack and I had a conversation about how to approach this, and here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do two sessions. This one will be the first, of course, and we're going to deal and delve into Jack's background and the biographical history and some thoughts and insights of that he had along the way. But in the second session, we've Jack's identified I think about 7 different key moments in the history of junior achievement that he's experienced and certainly had a critical role in. And we're going to deal in a separate session with each of those and get into more depth with those at a future time. So given Jack's long and distinguished history, it obviously deserves 2 or more sessions with all the information and experience he's had with it. So that's how we're going to deal with it. So, but Jack, if we can just start, I think we need to start at the beginning and just give a little bit of background in terms of where you grew up, how you got involved with junior achievement initially, and what those early experiences were.
All right. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And a lot of people watching this have probably heard this story a million times, so I'll try and be as succinct as I can. But I'm like many of the JSAM members. I'm a J kid. I got involved in the J Company program back in Toledo, Ohio. Joined in 1970. And some of you remember back in those early days, you had to be a sophomore or higher in school. They weren't taking freshmen at that time. It's pretty well known that I got involved in JA for all the wrong reasons, had to do with a girl. I was this really shy kid, was an okay student, terrible in music, okay in sports, but not great, just kind of minding my way through. And in those days, the JA people would come to the gymnasiums and recruit you. And so they did the whole spiel, which sounded interesting to me anyway. But most importantly, there was this blonde sitting right in front of me who wouldn't give me the time of day at school. But I saw she signed up for JA. So I made an effort to sign up as well. And, lo and behold, she changed my life just because I got involved because of her. And in those days, it was just the J Company program, which met after school, which a lot of people remember was a cool thing because you got to meet kids just not from your own school, but from all over the place. And my first year in the company program, again, this shy kid, go in and I got elected vice president of sales for my JA company. And so here's a kid that was afraid to talk to people. All of a sudden, not only did I have to sell, but I had to teach the other kids in our company how to sell. And so, it was one of those learn by doing experiences. You get a door slammed in your face long enough, after a while, you get used to it, which is good training for fundraising, by the way. And lo and behold, went on. And so I liked Jay so much that I got involved the second year, became president of my Jay company. And then the third year, I was treasurer of the Jay company and went on to compete in the National Treasurer of the Year competition, which was great fun. And, got to go to an AJAC and all those sorts of things. But, throughout that period of time, I was just getting so much out of the program in terms of personal development. And I always tell people that, the what I got most out of Jay was that when I went in, because of my background, I had blue collar background. My dad worked in a factory. My mom was a stay-at-home person. I always thought things happened to you as opposed to that you could make things happen. And Jay taught me that you could make things happen. And so that was my greatest takeaway. And I actually, back in the day, I was in the program in Toledo, Ohio, was actually one of the larger JA operations in the country, believe it or not. They had a designation metro area, which was 100 JA companies or more. And as such, we had one of the largest scholarship programs in the country. And because of my engagement in JA, I received a $4,000 JA scholarship, which, keep in mind, this is back in the 1970s, was enough to pay all 4 years through school for me at the University of Toledo. And so my connection to JA professionally started my sophomore year in college. I had stuck around as an advisor my freshman year in college and got to know a lot of people at JA. But I started full time with Junior Achievement back in June of 1974. And so I would go to school in the morning, come into the office, work in the afternoon. And of course, in those days, you ran a JA center. And lo and behold, I made it. I didn't really have a college experience, but I had this J experience where I was getting to meet so many business people that it was such a great door opener for me. And in those days, Jay in Toledo, and there were several markets, I think it was called progressive executive training, where people from other parts of the country would come in, the national organization would pay half their salary, the local area would pay half their salary, and they would be in a market for 2 years and then go off and run their own market. So I got to meet a lot of J executives and go back. People may remember Dave Withy, John Kerry, John Mazzarella went through that program. And so I got to learn from all those guys, but most importantly from Tom Rudder, who, for me was the total mentor. Got me through the organization. He saw stuff in me that nobody else saw. And lo and behold, when I graduated from college, I became executive director. And in those days, Tom was the executive vice president, and I was the executive director, so the number two guy. And so my skill set initially was just all very hands-on, operational. I knew everything you need to know about JA frontwards and backwards. I could put a blade on a bandsaw with the best of them, mop floors, paint. Used to say Colonel the Urinal. You did everything. And so a lot of the early people remember that. So I started, like I said, 1974, and I worked my way up. And when Tom Rudder retired in Toledo, uh, I got selected for his job, which there's a story there. The guy who was the CEO of Trinova Corporation, which came out of Libyon's Ford Glass, was the chairman of our board at the time. And had it not been for Tom pushing me, I remember this guy told him, Tom, you're thinking with your heart, not with your head. And I got the job anyway, because those of you that know Tom Rudder, he's stubborn old coot. And a year later, working with that CEO, he came up to tell me that he had almost made a terrible mistake, and that Tom was right. So that was a good learning experience.
How old were you at that time, about Jack?
At that time, I probably would have been 24, 25
Oh,
years
you're a
old.
young guy. Okay.
Yeah, pretty young.
For that job. Yeah.
And so I could see why they had their doubts about me. But at any rate, so I stayed in Toledo, did things there. I was very fortunate in my career. When I followed Tom Rudder in Toledo, I inherited a great operation, so I didn't have to save anything. I could take it to the next level. So my next move was to Junior Achievement of Wisconsin in 1988, and I followed another J legend,
Yeah.
Alan Kirtley.
What motivated you to go to Milwaukee?
I needed to do more. I had interviewed for a couple other J jobs. I grew up in Toledo, and that's all I knew. And
Yeah.
plus, Toledo at that point, and it proved to be true, unfortunately, was kind of at its cusp. After I left, had nothing to do with me leaving. It's just history. A lot of those big old manufacturing companies started to go downhill. The program, I think Tom had built to such a large size that it was hard to get much bigger.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be able to do more. And of course, J of Wisconsin, because of what Alan Kirtley did, was this plum out there that you know, was there for the getting. And I was very fortunate to be selected for that job.
Yeah.
And so moved there with my family. At that point, had three kids. One part of this story I didn't share is when Project Business got started, I hired this person called Diane Michaels and to
I
run
know where this
Project
is
Business.
going.
Yeah. And lo and behold, wasn't long because, you work for JA, you're there all day, you're there all night. The only people you meet are at JA. And we developed a really close friendship and then a relationship. And so married her. So she has been my partner this entire time. But yeah, that
How
was
many
it.
years is
Sit
this
down
now?
and do something different.
Just since you brought up Diane, how many years, Jack? Have you been married?
Oh, you had to ask me. 1981. So whatever that works out to.
Oh, 19 plus
40,
25.
not quite 40 years or
There you go.
45 years, I guess.
Terrific. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Anyway,
thank you.
great.
Thank you. Yeah,
So,
so, went on and, just a few side stories. And I think everybody that's been in an organization as long as I have had these side stories. But I'll never forget when I got the job in Wisconsin, it was this big job, much bigger staff. The staff was probably three times the size of what I had in Toledo, if not bigger. It was one of the few statewide operations at the time. I had a very senior, all CEO board of directors. And I'll never forget this gentleman by the name of Steve Graff was the managing partner of Arthur Anderson. And he was my board chair when I first went there. Actually, Fred Branco, who was the CEO of, another company there, actually hired me, but then Steve was my guy. And I forget, the first time I go into his office, he said, well, we hired you to run things here, so don't bother me unless you need something. And scared the hell out of me, frankly, is this still a relatively young, inexperienced guy.
yeah,
But I'll tell you what, that guy turns out to be probably the best board chair I had ever had. He was
really.
always there for me, just a great, great guy. And so, when I was there, at one point, I think we had 14 district offices. And so it was really a great training ground to go to work at the national organization because every one of those districts were very similar to a local J. In fact, some of those districts were bigger than J operations that are out there, and so spent quite a bit of time. I think about 15 years running the Wisconsin operation. And, I knew I wanted to do more, but as many will remember, the friction between the field and national back then was such that a lot of people were like, oh, you don't want to do that, that sort of thing. But then there was a guy, a CEO at the time, David Cherno, who approached me to serve as the chief operating officer. And my good friend and your good friend, Marty Lee, I think kind of put him up to it because Marty was going to be retiring. And he and I went back and forth. I interviewed, I turned it down. Finally, he got me to come out there. And, at one point I was thanking him. And he said, well, you don't have to thank me. You were the only guy for the job. And I thought, well, geez, David, that's very nice of you to say. He goes, no, really, nobody else wanted it. So that was my introduction there.
And when would that have been about? What?
That would have been in 2003.
Okay.
And so the interesting part of that is J Inc. at the time
Yeah.
was the national organization, merged with J International in 2004
Oh, geez.
to become J Worldwide. And so, this kid from Toledo that had been to Canada and Mexico all of a sudden was the COO of a global organization. And so over that next 5 years, I visited about 38 countries all over the globe and really got a picture of how the organization works.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. What an experience. So at that time, Cherno was the head of JA International as well as JA.
Yeah,
So it was
when the
all
merger took place, David was the CEO of Junior Achievement Inc., and there was this other gentleman, a former banker, CEO of J International. But at the time, J International was big, but it wasn't financially successful. And so they really needed, Big Brother to kind of step in. And so David successfully worked the board. He got that job. And so I became, his number two guy for the global entity.
Okay. Okay. And so in that job, well, let's go back just for a minute in Milwaukee.
Okay.
What do you feel were your key accomplishments, or what are you most proud of from what transpired in your very successful years in Milwaukee and Southeast Wisconsin, Jack?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim, because, as I said, I've been very fortunate that I followed Tom Rudder, which was a successful operation. Then I followed Alan Kirtley, very successful operation. And so, again, I didn't have to worry about keeping the doors open. I could do other things. And so I think some of the greatest success that I had there had to do with our district operations and really kind of bringing those together. When I first went there, they were renegade is a strong term, but they operated very independently. And so by the time I left, we had convinced them that the J office in Milwaukee would do all of their bookkeeping for them, produce their accounting statements, because prior to that, they were all doing their own, and it
Oh,
was just a headache
oh,
to try to get all that stuff, accomplished. And, one of the things that took place there I think it was the only one ever in the country, is there was a women's association. And it was made up basically many of the spouses of Fortune 500 executives in town. And they started off, I think they did a fair or something like that, but eventually it worked its way up to doing an auction to raise money, a holiday auction. And it was just a first class affair. I mean, that I inherited, had to keep it going. But, they would raise, when I first got there, they were raising about $200,000 a year in one night on this auction. By the time I left, it was up to like almost $500,000 a year. And then they would, use those funds that they supported. But I think most importantly, what that experience did, I was not used to working in that upper level society kinds of
yeah.
things. Going to the CEO of Cost Corporation or Rockwell Automation. And because of the spouses, we would get invited to parties, that sort of thing. And I was able to make other inroads. And, my biggest takeaway there is just remember you're always the hired hand. I think it's kind of easy when you travel in those circles to think, hey, I'm one of the guys. I was not one of the guys, but they tolerated me and I think they liked me because I knew my place.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be very successful, over time. And I know after I left and Tim Greiner succeeded me, the world had just changed, and the thought of having a women's association was kind of archaic. But to Tim's credit, he was able to take it to another level. But that was a tremendous learning opportunity for me.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Did You've got quite a legacy in terms of the people you've developed in that Milwaukee operation, who a number of them worked for JUSA and in the past. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, well, actually, I inherited a great team when I went there. Tom Dewar was the chief operating officer for the organization. So Tom and I became very close there. And then until, he decided he wanted to do other things. And I've never been one to hold people back. In fact, I encouraged and, spoke up for him. So he moved on to Detroit and then eventually went to work as chief fundraiser there. But Tim Greinert, when I originally went to Wisconsin, was pretty new, and he ran Jay up in the valley, the kind of the north central part of the state. And so that's where I got to know him and see his skills, very much people person skills with that. I always saw myself more as an operational guy, and it's not that I was anti-people, but I wasn't the charismatic guy going out there like a Tim Greinert doing that. So, and of course, Tim went on to many other great things and encouraged him. I helped him when he was looking at going to the national organization. And then the other one that people would know is Steve Schmidt, who of course works for the national organization, another great people person. So those people were all on staff. And I've always had this philosophy. In fact, I know one of the questions I saw here is, what do you think your secret sauce is? And once I got out of that, I had to do everything phase, the specialist to kind of earn your wings.
Yeah.
What I think I became very good at is hiring and supporting the right people, letting them do their job, get out of their way, be there for them if they need you, but other than that, get out of the way, and then let them take the credit for what they're doing. They're the ones doing it. And so that's, with Tim and Steve and many others that I've worked with, I think that if there was a contribution to that, I think that would probably be it.
Great. Any other thoughts in terms of your time in Milwaukee, Southeast Wisconsin?
Well, it was an interesting period for JA because, the K-12 programs in school were relatively new at the time.
Yeah.
And Wisconsin is kind of more old school. And so when I first went there, they were heavy, heavy company program. But as time went on, like in most areas, the company program side of it went backwards, and we started to go in school. And that's a major change. The kind of people that you have running in school programs are typically pretty different than the people that you have in that after school environment. So, I think when I went there, we had 1, 2, 3 facilities just in Milwaukee. We ended up selling those buildings, closing those company programs down. And so then the other things started to come in to light was the capstone programs were very big. And so what was challenging for me is here I am, the CEO of one of the largest G operations in the country, and everybody else was jumping on board on capstone. And, I tried in Wisconsin. My board at the time kept saying, well, Jack, we're already reaching X percentage of elementary and middle school kids, high school kids. Why would we invest all this money in a facility? And so when I would go to meetings and, I chaired the round table, it was a little awkward because this was like the shiny penny. And here Jack's not doing it. And so that haunted me even when I went to the national organization because people said, well, he doesn't like capstone.
Oh.
And, nothing's farther from the truth. I would have done it. And again, kudos to Tim Griner, who succeeded me in Wisconsin. He made it happen there. And so I give him great credit for that. But I think in terms of bringing the state closer together and having us operate as one is probably one of the things that I see as an accomplishment when I was there.
Okay.
And of course, fundraising. I mean, when I left there was a ton of money in the bank because we were running surpluses every year. In fact, throughout my entire career, I'm not sure there was a time when wasn't running a surplus.
So, what was the charge when you went to national, as it was called? It quickly became a worldwide effort.
Right.
And you got involved in that. So tell us about your experiences traveling the world and what you saw in those J operations and what was your takeaway and how did you feel about it?
When I first went to the national organization in 2003 as chief operating officer, the relationship between the field and the national organization probably wasn't at an all-time high. And of course, it goes up and down over the years. Yeah. We've all experienced that. But it was a particularly challenging period because we had gone through a couple CEOs, after Carl's death. And those folks, none of them had any prior J experience. And so that just in and of itself was a learning experience for these new CEOs, and that tended to create some ruffling of the feathers. And then again, going back to the early 2000s, there was a consulting firm. I'm not sure if it was McKinsey or who, but they had looked at JA's structure, and we had these regional offices and regional vice presidents, which, I always thought were pretty important roles. And for whatever reason, they recommended the national organization get rid of them. And so they did. And so, it's just, I even look at that happened when I was in Wisconsin. My connection with National went from a Dale Johnson, who was a tenured JA guy, to, and I can't even remember her name, but a lawyer who did all the stuff. And, I can remember she would call me and say, "How come you never call me for," and it's like, what are you going to do for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think part of my challenge when I went to the national organization was to kind of bring back that service to the field and bring the groups back together. And it never really got back to the way it used to be with I think there were 5 regions at one point,
Right.
but we did create the regions. I brought back regional representatives. One of probably the best hires I made when I went to national was Buzzy Thibodeau, who became my number 2 guy and did it. Actually, I didn't hire him. Now I'm thinking about it. He was at National in the marketing group, and he switched over. But at any rate, so that was kind of the key going into it. And of course, during that period of time is when Capstone was getting initiated, and so we had these legal squabbles with the group out of Kansas City that had a version of Jay Biztown.
Exchange City, right? Was that what it
Exchange
was?
City, that's right.
Okay.
And so we got involved in some of that. David handled most of that, but I kind of got the fallout from that when it happened. And then during that period of time is when, our funders here in the US were mostly global companies. They were starting to get hit up by J operations all over the world through J International. And there was no communications between the two. It was a strained relationship between J International and J USA. There was a lot of competition going on. And so finally, got 2004, it was almost like a shotgun marriage where our funders were telling us, hey, either you guys get your act together as one or none of you are going to get anything. And so J Inc. merged with J International. And, as I said, I took on that role as chief operating officer for junior achievement. Well, it would have been J Worldwide then, the new J Worldwide. And then again, in twists of fate that when you look backwards on, turns out that Jack Harris was the chief operating officer for J International. So that's when I first met and started working with Jack and saw what a talent he was. And our job was to kind of bring these two very different organizations. We're all running JA, but running it very, very differently. And the fee structures, in the USA were so different than what they were in other parts of the world. We had to figure out, okay, how are we going to get compensated?
Sure.
And one of the, I think, unintended consequences of that merger was that J in the US sort of lost representation because you had 100 other member countries around the
Yeah.
world. But J in the US was being run by this global board of directors, J Worldwide. So at any rate, during probably 3 or 4 years, traveled the world trying to bring everybody together. The international folks were looking to what was being done in the US in terms of training on fundraising. So, and just on general operations. So Tom Dewar and I spent a lot of time together in the air and on the ground in other parts of the world doing trainings and so on. So that was really, and it was probably the most inspiring part of my career because I had seen Jay operate here in the United States, and because you're so familiar with it, you kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
But then I would go to the Middle East where Queen Rani of Jordan was kind of our ambassador, and we would go into the schools there. Saria Salti, who many will remember, a dynamic female leader in the Middle East. we would go into schools and they were totally segregated. The boys and the girls weren't even in the same buildings. They didn't talk. Yet in junior achievement, we brought them together.
Really?
And it was fascinating
Yeah.
because the young women were almost treated like second class citizens.
Oh, geez.
And when they would go to compete in company of the year and stuff, 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, those young women would beat up on the young men in terms of winning the competition.
Yeah.
And so I saw that impact. The other great story I have was in China. I was in the Tong district, and we went into a school, and a couple of things happened there. Is, number one, you think about it, communist China, and here we are with junior achievement. And so Sean Rush was the CEO at the time, and he and I were welcomed to the school. They had a band out front playing and shaking our hands. And as we're going in, I thought, boy, it's odd. The principal made a point of introducing me to the secretary of the school.
Oh.
I just thought, that's odd. But then we go into this classroom
Yeah,
and
I know where this is
it was,
going.
yeah, it was a middle grades classroom. And of course I had an interpreter in my ear and I'm watching. And of course, I couldn't understand anything that was being said other than I could see the charts. And clearly they were talking about international trade.
Yeah.
And at one point, this one kid said something, and everybody in the classroom started laughing, and they would turn around and looked at me. And I said to the interpreter, I said, "What was that all about?" And she said, "Well, they were talking about international trade and how China trades industrial goods to South America for foodstuffs. And, it's how it works." And so apparently this kid raised his hand and said, "Oh, that's the same way that the United States trades weapons to the Middle East for oil."
Oh,
And
geez. Oh,
it
God.
really caused me to open my eyes and say, we got to look at this thing more globally.
Wow.
We just can't look at it through our US lenses and to see the impact. And, one time I was in Palestine, and I always get pronunciated Ramallah, I guess, is the capital, and it's on the West Bank. Um, but Soraya took me there and they had a company of the year competition. And we go into town and buildings were bombed out everywhere. I mean, literally just craters. And there were goats eating, stuff. And we go into this building and these kids do their spiel for company of the year. It was incredible what they came up with. And what I'll never forget is this young man came up to me afterwards and he said, "Sir, I know go all over the world. Do you think there's any way that I could ever compete with kids from other part of the world?" And I looked at him, I said, "Son, looking at the environment you're working in here, the challenges that you have, and look what you did.
Yeah.
If you can do this here, you can do this anywhere."
Yeah.
And again, that was the inspirational piece to me that has really helped keep me going through JA.
Well, yeah. Well, and just as an aside, you're doing some terrific work with your new program in lead and exciting to have those JA professionals from around the globe experience different parts as you did. And I know that's exciting and to your credit for developing that and carrying forth that attitude. So that went on for how long with the JA worldwide, and we're going to talk in more detail, I think,
Yeah.
in the next session about a little bit of this, but give us some time frame or
Well,
context.
so I was exclusively J Worldwide from say 2004 till 2007.
Okay.
And then in 2007, we already started to see that the business model of the way JA was working wasn't working because JUSA had a business model and the rest of the world had a business model. And as it turns out, JUSA operations were really subsidizing what was going on at the J Worldwide office because the travel, everything, it's somewhat costly. And so as early as 2007, we started to realize that hey, we got to make some changes here. So that's when I became CEO of, we created Junior Achievement USA. And at that time, it was still like a wholly owned subsidiary of J Worldwide. But I had this task of, which was actually a great task. It was a do-over opportunity, and so having the relatively long history I'd already had with JA, we went in and I had to build a board. Some of the people from the old board stayed on, but candidly, most of the most influential ones went to the worldwide board. So I had a rebuilding opportunity to take place. And so, some of the things that my takeaways were is that with J Worldwide or even Junior Achievement Inc. back in the day, the board of directors was so big, and when it was J Worldwide, I think there was over 100 people on the board of
Really?
directors. And, I realize we utilize those boards for resources, both people and money. So I get it, but it's a big board. And
Yeah.
so my number one goal was we're going to get a more manageable size board of directors and kind of work that way. And so we slowly were able to build that out. So from 2007 to 2011, we operated Junior Achievement USA. I was still doing some international stuff, but I was primarily USA at that time. And then in 2011 is when those organizations separated. And it was all amicable. I mean, it was all planned,
Yeah.
candidly. And the way it broke out is that J Worldwide would own the brand of Junior Achievement, J Worldwide, and then Junior Achievement USA would own all the curriculum because it had been developed based on funding from US areas and so on. And so
Mhm.
then we ended up paying, which was really good for J Worldwide because then J and the USA ended up paying the same amount to J Worldwide as the rest of the world was, or at least the same percentage. It was 1% of revenue.
Okay.
And so JUSA was still paying way more into the overall pot, but at least it was on par.
Yeah.
And it gave JUSA, really gave us time to focus and build junior achievement in the United States for the needs of specifically J kids in the United States or children in the
Yeah.
United States. And so it was, some people say, well, you should have never separated. It probably was one of the better moves post J Worldwide that was done because it was able to give focus on the USA.
Sure. Sure. Well, prior to that, my impression was, Jack, that JUSA was really subsidizing so much of the worldwide operation, as you were talking about in
Yeah.
terms of the expenses. And it seems like this separation then result in at least some equity or fairness or logic in terms of a structure for funding.
Yeah, because we kept the same business model for our J areas. I mean, they were paying, the 10% and
Yeah,
all
sliding
that.
scale deal.
And then the only thing Worldwide was getting was 1%, which a lot of money, but it was nowhere near what they were getting before. And
Yeah,
it enabled me to build a team of executives that were totally focused specifically on JUSA.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Do so then when you started focusing on JUSA, um where was that at? What was the relationship with the areas through that whole transition and after that when that
I
started?
think the majority of the leaders in the US were pleased to see that JUSA had its own direction.
Okay.
It helped with the relationship building, but we still had a ways to go. Some of the challenges that we were facing, and this goes way back 2011, was the fee structure was under
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
because
We'll talk about
over the years, back in the days when there was only one program, the J Company program,
yeah.
it was pretty even playing field.
Yeah.
But over the years, you know, people weren't, because the sales of kits was contributing a lot to JUSA. There was about a 100% markup on those kits. But then as we started to implement programs that didn't need kits, or you go into capstone facilities, it just became, a mingle of logic that was, candidly, it was hard to sell.
Sure. Sure. And we'll get into that issue and some of those other key issues and times when when heading the organization on the next session. But just from a 30,000 foot kind of level, what do you feel some of the things that were the biggest challenge? Well, let's start with some of the biggest challenges. We won't go into a lot of depth. I've had a feeling we know what those might be, but just share with us what some of those might be.
Yeah, I think the challenges, and this was probably true before JUSA separated, but technology, use of technology in the organization. We had several failed attempts at building a database. We worked with third-party vendors, and you try to get a one-size-fits-all, and generally never works. So that was a huge challenge. Heck, it was even a challenge getting people using common day tools today, spreadsheets, lack of information how to do that, computers in general.
Yeah.
So the technology piece, I think, was a great hindrance to us as an organization. We had also inherited a long living defined benefit pension plan that, like a lot of defined benefit pension plans, were breaking the organization in terms of what was going in. And the times have changed. The idea that a defined benefit pension plan it became archaic. Everybody, all of our corporate partners were on 401ks. And so that was an issue we had to tackle, which was pretty substantial. As you get a little bit later going on, 2019, we had this great opportunity with the centennial celebration, which was a great opportunity to get the word out about junior achievement, because not many organizations make it for 100 years. So that was a tremendous success. We also, part of Buzzy's job when he was at National had to do with raising funds from the government, which, as you recall from the old days, was taboo.
Sure.
We wouldn't take any government money.
Right.
And then we started to realize that, everybody else is doing it. Let's just make sure we don't become dependent on it. And to Buzzy's credit, under his leadership, he got several huge grants from Congress that were set up to develop programs. So they didn't become operational dollars, and went through that. So navigating that whole government thing, I served on the the National Commission for Financial Literacy under President Bush, and then that carried over to the Obama administration, which was fascinating because Charles Schwab was actually the chair of that committee, and we met pretty regularly. So I got to meet a lot of interesting people there. But it was, again, our way of getting into a lot of these agencies, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which I think is probably going to be gone now, but working with that group. We started doing a lot in DC, working with national banking organizations. And so there was just all this opportunity that was out there. But, actually, when I look back on my tenure, it was more about operational cleanup and creating efficiencies. It wasn't about any major organizational shifts that would take place, things like 3DE. That was a field-led initiative that I supported, encouraged, backed all the way. And it didn't really come into fruition until towards the end of my tenure. But other than that, I'd say everything was more, let's get this organization running like a business and have something to build the future on. And so, it's kind of a pain, and I'm sure you heard the same thing. Everybody, well, what's your legacy? Well, I don't know. But I think that's one of them. I think, if somebody at my funeral would say, hey, he was a really good operator, ran it like a business, ran surpluses, um, I would be very happy with that.
Okay. Well, you answered a question that I had on my list already. So there you go.
Okay.
I won't have to endure that again. So you always, well, let me go to one issue and then I'm going to go to a global issue. One issue we aren't going to talk about in the next session, but is the key one was the sale of the headquarters building. Talk about that. What was in the thought process and
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, those folks that really know the history of the organization will know that when we moved to Colorado Springs in 1987, I think the exact number was like 110 people on staff at that time, and that building was filled.
yeah,
And in fact, we had another building where the education team would actually meet. Over time, well before the pandemic, we started to realize that as beautiful as Colorado is, people were not willing to move the way they had been kind of in the old days. And
yeah,
so when we went out to recruit talent, I would go for the best person, not the best person that would move to Colorado Springs. And so, over time, our chief education person, Lisa Gillis, who I brought in, she was just prior to MC. I think she lived in Atlanta, so she stayed there. We had some technology leadership that was not based in Colorado Springs. And so over the years, between getting greater efficiencies because of technology and because of the remote nature of the national office workforce, that building was just way too big for what we needed. And then you couple that with it was what 30 years old, and with the winds in Colorado, we'd be putting new roofs on that building every other year, which cost a fortune. And so we started to realize we got to do something. And because that property was all donated to us and the building was built and paid for, there were politics involved, the
right.
people that attracted us to Colorado Springs. And we wanted to make sure that we did not dismiss the importance that they had in the history of junior achievement and just say we're going to move away. Now, with that said, I contracted with pro bono contracted with Accenture, and they did a study for us in terms of buying, selling, leasing, location, because I would always get this stuff that, hey, if you move to the East Coast, you'll be able to attract that talent that's going to be there. But Accenture did a study and they pretty clear that we couldn't afford the cost of talent on the East Coast in a DC or even in Atlanta, they were looking at for us. And so with all these different factors that came into it, we came to the conclusion that we're going to stay in Colorado Springs. It's basically a back office operation anyway. So it really doesn't matter where we are. We don't get a lot of visitors coming to the building or anything. And in doing the study, we also saw it probably made more sense to lease than it did to buy or build, just because of the fluctuating nature of the organization.
Sure.
And that's how we ended up in the Oracle building in Colorado Springs. Now, the great irony is, I think, and Ed Freeman was instrumental in making that happen. He needs to take every bit of credit in the world. I think it's set up for maybe a third of the people that we had would have had in the old building. But even today now, when I go in there, you have a few HR people there, you have a few tech people there, finance people there. So it was a good timely move. We probably could have even gone smaller, but there wouldn't have been that great of an economy of scale. So, it worked out really well.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. And the results have been true to form. You've
Absolutely.
been pleased with it. Okay,
Yep.
and it works out
And
for.
so we still bring our teams, or Jack is still bringing his team out there once or twice a year, so that bring everybody together. You know, when you run a basically remote organization,
Sure,
you got to maintain those people contacts, especially when you're in a people business like junior
sure,
team.
sure. No question about it. So Jack, you, I remember established sort of an objective or goal, or laid out that you wanted to be 50 years in the organization. And in terms of that, talk to us. What was it about 50 years? Was it just a round number, or?
Just a good round number. Just a good round number. And in all honesty, Jim, I could have easily stuck around. I still loved what I was doing, but it was time. You know, I think when I saw some of the young talent in the organization, give them an opportunity to do something. And as you alluded to, I've been working on this J Worldwide project, so I'm still involved. I'm still involved in the JUSA Foundation. But yeah, it was just a good number. That's all.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's a good target. So,
Yeah.
do you recall how many years Joe Francomano was with JA working?
Actually, that was part of my logic. And now that you mentioned that, I think he was 46 years.
Well, heck,
Yeah, yeah,
you far surpassed him. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
and and equally significant, or more, if not more, in terms of what's transpired over those years. Joe's years were, it was the JA program and expanding throughout the country, which was significant, certainly. But I mean, all the transitions that have taken place during your tenure has just been incredible. So
Yeah, and you know, and reflecting, and you know this because you've gone through it, and you reflect when you retire on, you know, many things flash in front of you. But I do think when people always say, "Well, what's the list of your greatest accomplishments?"
yeah,
I think one of them is the team that we built at the national organization, and the other was recruiting Jack Harris to be my successor. I mean, we had these two great talents. Tim Griner could have stepped in easily. I think what gave Jack the nod, though, was we needed to bring this 3D organization, not just a wholly owned subsidiary, but all part of Junior Achievement. And, you know, so I hopefully, and we've talked, he's well positioned for the future. All that organizational stuff that I took care of should be good for at least a few more years, and they can now focus, you know, on the mission,
yeah,
which I think he's very good at.
yeah, yeah. No question about it. Well, you laid an incredible foundation. Uh, like I said, we're going to get into some more heady issues when we go to the second session, in terms of what your thought process and what some of the thoughts, parts of the decisions you've had to make. But in closing here, if you reflect, what would be some advice for young JA associates that you would have in terms of what they could be thinking about, or how, or elements that you think would be
Yeah.
things that would be important for their success?
Well, Jim, it's kind of tough because we're growing up in different eras.
Yeah.
You know, I had this thing from my earliest days working with Tom Rudder. My goal was to be the CEO of the national organization. People now tell me, Jack, that's archaic. Nobody does that. But what I would tell people, and again, it's kind of countercultural right now, is try and get varied experiences in JA, not just in your own operation, but be exposed to how J operates in other cities. If that means moving, if that just means befriending people and going on visits, because my greatest learnings, and I always use the Wizard of Oz analogy, you know, when I was in the field, I would hear all these great stories about everything going on and everything is sweet as pie. And when I went to the national organization, it was kind of like going behind the curtain and saying, holy cow, you know, and but it taught me a lot in the international piece. And, you know, that's why with this lead program and getting executives from different parts of the world to visit other parts of the world, it actually gives you a greater appreciation for the mission
Yeah.
that we have. Whereas if, you stay in one market, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's really hard to get that bigger picture of Jay unless you get these other experiences to really make that come to life. I, as I reflect, and a lot of people have heard me say this, is as I've watched people over the years, typically because we're such a decentralized organization and so many of our executives are entrepreneurial, I think after somebody's been in a market, and there's no magic number, I think it's somewhere between 8 and 12 years, they kind of get bored with business as usual.
Yeah.
And that's when they start getting creative. And some people get creative in a good way, and other people get creative in a not so good way.
Yeah.
And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for the organization. It's not good for the people. Now, that's not always the case. I look at Elena Yerian, who I think is over 40 years with Junior Achievement now.
Yeah.
There's somebody who's been reinventing herself year after year after year. So it is possible, but I think she is the rare rarity.
Yeah. Yeah. So final question. So why is it that you believe so much in junior achievement to stick with? I mean, I'm sure you've thought of and had opportunities in all those 50 years, and what was it about junior achievement that kept you?
Well, number one, it changed it changed my life as a kid. And so that meant a lot to me. It was also the people, both NJ and the people that I got to meet because of Junior Achievement. Um, you know, I've been in the Oval Office probably 4 or 5 times. How
Wow.
many average
Wow.
people get the opportunity to do that?
Yeah.
I've been at Bill Gates's house. How many
Really?
people get the opportunity to
Really?
do that? Yeah, but more or less, it's just the people. J people in general are just kind of fun to be. Most of them are fun to be around.
Yeah, no, no, I understand that. So, well, terrific. Any other things you'd like to add, Jack, to your
Just
story
that, for
years?
anybody young in their career, I think make a lot of friends through the organization and be careful who you hang with. Because listen to your regional representatives. They can really coach you on that. But, the people that I've worked with, and maybe I just spent too much time at work, but, some of my closest personal friends are people, Buzzy Thibodeau and I are almost like brothers. Tim Greinert and I are very, very close. Steve Schmidt, you could just go down the list. It's and it's not politically correct now, but it truly is a family.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, I question whether that would be politically incorrect in this time, but I understand the point where we have
Yeah,
to be sensitive about a lot of things.
yeah,
So that's it. So very good. Well, that's about the time that we had allocated for this session.
great.
So it's been very productive. I appreciate your candor and honesty. It's been fascinating for me to hear your story. Parts of it I've heard and been enthralled with that and all the rest of it, Jack, and look forward to the next session. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Welcome, Jim. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.